What if we could transform the business of families and family businesses where emotional governance takes precedent? I'd like to welcome Franco Lombardo to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely Friday. Welcome, Franco.
Angelina, thank you so much for having me on the show. What a privilege.
It is my pleasure to host you, and you're joining us today from the lovely city of Toronto, Ontario.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So, would you share with the listeners and the viewers a little bit about your story personally or professionally? How did you arrive here? And what inspired you to start Veritage?
Good question. So we at Veritage believe that we all want to feel safe emotionally in our relationships with our wealth and in our environments. The challenge is most of us don't, because we come from this thing called family. And somewhere along the line, the child was made to feel unsafe, either intentionally or hopefully or unintentionally. And they remember that. So they chose to not express themselves, not be themselves, not show up for who they really are. And I grew up in a home where I was not safe emotionally or physically. So I want to transform the world and make it a safer place. So that's why Veritage exists.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that personal background. And so you're born and raised in British Columbia, in Vancouver, or did you grow up in Italy?
No, I was born in Vanderhoof, which is north of British Columbia, but I consider myself Italian, right? So when people ask me where you from, I say I'm Italian, even though I'm Canadian. And it's because I'm proud of my father's heritage. He was from Sicily, and Italians are really cool, I think. So I consider myself Italian, even though I was born in Vanderhoof. And because my father was a mining engineer, we traveled around the world.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the backstory. So let's start with the problem. I know that in prior podcasts and in some of the amazing videos on your YouTube channel, you talked about spoken as well as unspoken rules. And those rules could be father knows best, spouses aren't meant to be in the family business, the oldest one always takes over, and we could bring up, Harry and William if need be, or another unspoken or spoken rule could be it's none of your business. So do you think that hinders someone then when it comes to emotional governance, even designing their legacy? What have you seen out there?
Well, I think, I'd like to bring it back to really communication. Everyone says they want to communicate better. But what does that mean? Does it mean you want to speak in a different language? Do you want to, email, for those that are older, fax? What they're really saying is, I want to feel safe in my relationships. I want to feel safe in my communication. In other words, I want to tell you exactly what I'm thinking and feeling. No one's not going to be used against me in any way, shape, or form. The challenge is when we think of communication, we think of external communication. I believe we need to focus first on our internal communication, because this is going to determine what we say and how we interpret what's received. And that internal communication is based on a whole bunch of rules or biases that we have that interpret.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I know that oftentimes people have an internal landscape, but rarely are we taught to explore that internal landscape of the thoughts that drive us, the motivators, the feelings. It's almost countercultural in especially in Western society to look inside and get really clear that what's inside of us has as much, if not more, power in what we can produce on the outside. But it takes a brave soul to go inwards.
Yeah, it does, I was talking to a colleague of mine, James Laughlin, out of New Zealand, who's an incredible leadership coach. And I asked him, I said, what percent of the population actually does the work on themselves? And he gave me a number that staggered me, but yet didn't surprise me, which was 5%, right? And it takes courage to go inside of oneself and develop mindful consciousness. But the rewards are vast, because I was recently moderating a panel in Melbourne, and I had a family that I've been working with on the panel, and I'm interviewing them in front of all their peers. And the level of vulnerability and authenticity and respect they had for each other was amazing. So much for Angelina, it transformed a room. Okay. And families were coming up to them after saying, how did you do that? How did you get there? You seem like you're in a magical place. So we all want that magical place. We just don't know how to get there. And as coaches, you and I know that how you get there is you take the first step. You say yes to the coaching. go past the fear and step into what's possible. And by the way, that, as you know, is where legacies are designed.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we chatted about in the preamble had to do with, you had shared that you've worked with families that accumulate great wealth, and yet there's this vulnerability piece around the emotional connectivity, and yet that fills one's soul. And yet to say to somebody across the table, I would really like to be close to you, that level of vulnerability, money can't protect somebody from potential rejection. Especially, let's say if there's a narcissistic family member, for instance, that has them have great skills when it comes to building the business and maintaining the wealth, but yet to be that vulnerable to say, I want a more intimate level of closeness. And that's where it's all at. That's the love. That's the thing that humans crave. And yet to get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, it's when people say, I want to communicate better, that's exactly what they want. They want a level of vulnerability, connection, emotional safety. And they just don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
want,
it's our job as coaches to facilitate that journey for them.
yeah, absolutely.
Because when they get there, the reward is vast. And what happens is a lot of families have this belief that financial security creates emotional security, and it does not. It does
It
the
doesn't.
opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably another unspoken rule.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So going back to the initial rules question, is it's about examining what are the rules we have in here. Men are, women are, God is, sex is, money is, leadership is, power is, responsibilities. Those are all rules and biases that we've got. And if we're going to engage in a conversation around succession and legacy, we have to examine what those rules are. Otherwise, we're going to bring them to the table.
And not realize the unconscious biases and baggage
Correct.
that we bring forward because we haven't done the work to clarify.
And then what happens is we end up fighting for those biases.
Oh,
And we have an argument about, I don't know, I'm going to make something up, the car, or the classic one is the cottage. It's not about the cottage, it's what it represents
sure. Absolutely.
based on the lens of our biases.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then people can revert to past behaviors and that's their familiar place. I know you use that you've used the phrase before, land of the familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking to my team this morning about something, and I realized, but I've realized this for a while now, but when I wrote my fifth book, Safe Space, Governance and Action, okay, I sort of had a conceptual idea of what it was, but I didn't really get it at an emotional, visceral level until probably the last 4 or 5 years. Because safe space has to start with the individual. We have to feel emotionally safe with ourselves. We have to trust ourselves. We have to respect ourselves, and we have to include ourselves, which is our feelings. We live in a society where we're incredibly emotionally disconnected from ourselves and each other. We're more connected to this little device here than we are to ourselves. And it's difficult to connect with another if we're disconnected with ourselves in the first place. And the governance and action piece is about governing yourself emotionally, where you choose the response as opposed to the response choosing you, which is the automatic default.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's brilliant. I think some people might call that self-management, but again, that takes a higher level of personal agency and courage and not having excuses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me keep focusing in on the problem for a moment. I'm just going to agitate the problem for listeners out there. One of the things we also chatted about in the preamble is the state of the industry when it comes to family businesses and allowing the value of emotional governance to be front and center. So, what else do you see when it comes to problems? Is it that in the macro economy, we're swimming in waters like a fish where we're just so focused in on consumerism or on keeping up with the Joneses, or what are some of the other problems as I agitate the problem for a moment?
I think one of the major problems is there's a lot of, good firms out there uh, that try to do the emotional piece and hide it under what they call governance. There's a lot of families, a lot of great families that have great governance documents that deal with, policies, procedures, operational stuff. And they'll have a little, not a little, maybe 1 or 2 pages on the values and vision and mission and purpose for the wealth. And the messaging is, or the assumption is that this governance document or the shareholders agreement document or the trust document will manage family dynamics. And it doesn't. It agitates it because people haven't had the conversations. And, there is a lot of great advisors in the space. And there's also a lot of advisors that are trying to do the emotional piece and calling it governance. And that is doing more harm than good. Right? There's not one firm, not one advisor in this space that can do everything for a client. And yet there's a number of firms that think they can.
Yeah.
And that saddens me and it frustrates me.
I think that's a brilliant point that you bring up. I think a lot of times financial planners are expected to be coaches. Estate planning attorneys are expected to be coaches, but they don't have the training. And you probably know this as well as I do. And maybe this is new information to some of the listeners out there. And an attorney can create the most amazing document in the 4 corners, but he or she cannot, like you had said, ensure that the family will get along. And it's not for the lack of legal training from the attorney. Yeah, legacies don't fall apart because the legal documents. There was a gentleman on the show, David Lennox. He had a podcast. It was called Dead Celebrities Podcast. And he renamed it. I can't remember what he renamed it as. But what he was saying, whether it's the story of Robin Williams or whoever it is, the children, even if there's multiple spouses, they fight over the baseball cap. And what does the baseball cap mean? But they never talked about that, the bicycle of Robin Williams or the ball cap. But that's what they're in court over. They're not in court over the millions. It's because they never sat down and retained Franco or a valuable coach or a consultant and advisor to say, how would you like to, be as a family in shared values? And let's talk about the baseball cap.
Yeah. What really matters to you, right?
Correct.
And I think from the family's perspective is, they rely on advisors. So I put it on the advisors, and then from the family's perspective, it was fascinating. The client I had on the panel in Melbourne, the family, the patriarch was on them. He just turned 80, I think. And, Aussie guy, great, typical man's man. And he was sharing that, he was scared at first. And what's he going to do? Is he going to blow up the family and all that sort of stuff? But his level of vulnerability is so profound that he was mobbed later. And as he was saying, but mainly by women, about how can you help me change my father? And he asked me, he said, why do you think so many women approach me? I said, it was really simple. They see what's possible for their dad. So I think the other thing that's out there, and for you men listening, is vulnerability is the new power mate. Period.
Yeah. I think men, obviously I'm not a male, but I think oftentimes what I've observed is men feel a lot more, but they don't talk about it. They won't come out and say it. And
they got nowhere to talk about it, Angelina. That's the problem. And it's been conditioned into them that if you do that, you're a sissy, you're gay, you're weak, you're this. And actually, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Before I move on to my next question, I had interviewed both my parents at the first year of COVID for 10 or 11 hours each. It's obviously an hour a day, not at one sitting. And I remember my dad kept saying to me, are my answers good enough? I need to read up on how CEOs and executives answer. And I thought your answers are perfect. They're enough. And so it's interesting. I think that, if a male is vulnerable, and I did share that 80% of my listening audience happens to be male, it's almost like you talk about biases, will their answers be good enough? If they're being authentic from the heart, of course they're good enough. That's all anybody needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as males, we haven't been taught to be vulnerable. If anything, we've been conditioned societally that vulnerability thing isn't safe. It's a sign of weakness. And it's the exact opposite. The quote that I gave you, vulnerability is the new power, is not mine. It's from Gilbert Enoka, who's the mental skills coach for the New Zealand All Blacks, which are the highest winning sports franchise in 125 years.
Yes. Yes. There's another quote you also like by Galileo that has to do with truth.
Yes. Yeah. So let me see if I remember it. I don't remember.
I have it written down, but the notebook is in another room.
Yeah. So I think I think the key is to uncover one's truth. That's the piece. I don't remember the first part, but that's the first one.
Yes. I think what you're hinting at is that when especially males can be vulnerable enough to share their truths, that's exactly what the people need around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we become dependable and trustworthy and incredibly magnetic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, speaking of traditions and Father Knows Best, what are some of the best, as well as some of the worst family traditions that you've seen and heard in your years of practice?
I think some of the worst traditions are around shutting feelings down.
Mm.
You know, it's a lot of the work that I do is about really helping the individuals reconnect with themselves
Okay.
emotionally, because they've been beaten up emotionally, that feelings aren't okay. I've seen I've seen emotional traditions of favoritism,
Okay.
right? There's the obvious ones of alcohol and drugs and affairs, but the one that's the saddest for me is the emotional um, abandonment. Where individuals are conditioned to abandon themselves emotionally because they don't. It's not safe to express their feelings, so they hide them
Sure.
and they
Sure.
become big, tough, burly guys.
Sure.
Another one that I see in some countries is the tradition of excluding women, right? And there was a study that came out from Harvard. I'd love to find it. That shows that actually women are better inheritors than men because they have a higher emotional intelligence and compassion and vulnerability that most men don't have. So they become better leaders and inheritors.
Oh, that's very interesting. I know a lot of the times depression is one of those unspoken areas also that somebody can.
Yeah, and I believe, my belief, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist to clear that up. I'm a coach. My belief is that depression comes from an inability to express one's feelings. It's definitely one of the contributors to it.
Sure.
I
Sure.
Right. And then good traditions are really expression of feelings, where you pay compliments to the kids. I tell my kids I love them and I'm proud of them as often as I can. Because they need to hear that. And I think the other thing that's important to for our kids is to show them that we like them.
Ooh, that's a big one. That's a big
I
one.
can love you, but I may not like you. We have to show them that we like them.
Yeah.
Well, right. So I think the traditions that I really like are the ones that are inclusive, where there's trust and respect shown on a regular basis, and emotions are open. They're okay to have them.
Yeah. I think there's a fellow Canadian, Jordan Peterson, that spoke about sometimes parents don't like their children or vice versa. And that could be a pink elephant in the room.
For sure. And it shows up, it's obvious. Favoritism is the thing, And on that note, I have a white paper called the four horsemen of the apocalypse that all big families face. And the first one's fair versus equal.
Mm.
Right. And it's parents say, well, I don't have a favorite child. Well, the reality is we all do at any given moment.
It's
Right.
human until
It
we
is
can
human.
become
It's
self-aware.
human. Because we connect better with one at this time, not with the other. We got things in common with one, not with the other. We still love them, and it's okay to have a favorite at any given moment.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that is something that needs to be brought out into the open because of the effect that it can have emotionally on the other siblings. Kris Jenner often said that Kim Kardashian was her favorite, and I often wondered what effect did that have on the other five or six.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's brilliant. Thank you. Would you share any of the other three of the horsemen of
Yeah,
Veritage?
yeah. So there's the fair versus equal. Then there's the enable versus empower.
Mm,
And the way I set that up is, a lot of people have seen the movie The Godfather,
I've never
right?
seen it, but keep going.
Okay, so The Godfather is, I think, it's one of the best gangster movies and also family business movies out there. So Vito Corleone, who's the Godfather, has three sons, and one of them is Fredo, who's not quite there. Like, he just doesn't have the abilities to be a true leader. So I always joke to say every family has a token Fredo, right? The one that needs a little special assistance, they're not quite motivated, they're not there. So we enable that individual's behavior. And eventually that behavior becomes intolerable. And it's about transforming enablement into empowerment, where individual takes accountability. Right? We can't be empowered with ourselves unless we know ourselves.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. And this again is a plug for coaching. I think oftentimes if a parent can't put themselves in the footsteps because they haven't done the inner work, that's why a coach is so valuable, because they can want the best for their child or a family member, etc. But if they haven't done the work themselves, they can't hold the hand of that other individual and say, "Hey, walk with me on this journey to go from A to Z."
Yeah, and it lacks authenticity.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I think
can't ask you to be different if I'm not doing the work of myself.
correct, correct. Yeah, it's interesting. You had talked again in prior podcasts and some of the YouTube videos about families that have accumulated great wealth, and so that's one skill set. But to do a succession well, or to do this personal development piece, or even designing the legacy, requires other skills that you might not see a return on investment right away, especially when entrepreneurs can be money motivated. Okay, yeah. Any other thoughts before I go on to the next question?
Yeah, so the last two are entitlement versus contribution. It's about transforming entitlement into contribution, going from me to we. And then the last piece is burden versus responsibility.
Say it one more time.
Burden versus responsibility.
Oh,
Burden is where it's thrust upon, responsibility is where it's chosen.
yeah. Yeah.
Because as a dear friend of mine says, family business is not a part-time thing. It's a 24/7, 365 day a year commitment. And you either choose that or you don't.
Yeah, it's interesting. If somebody doesn't want it, then the resentment.
Yeah. I work with an individual um, that is a shareholder of a family, gets significant dividends, but yet resents the business because of what it represents. Was his grandfather, who was tyrannical guy to his father. So he's conflicted. I'm getting all these dividends, supports my lifestyle, but I resent the business.
Yeah. You've also
You know,
shared, sorry, go ahead, please.
and those kinds of conversations, individuals don't have with a lot of people.
Sure, sure. Well, again, it's easier to talk about news, sports, and weather than to talk about, what's eating Gilbert Grape, underneath the
Exactly.
surface. Yeah.
Exactly.
I know you've also brought up this, reality that oftentimes the children within these affluent families can resent the business because the business got more time. It was like that
Yep.
invisible, obvious child.
It's the other sibling. It's the favorite child,
Correct, correct.
right? And you're
Yeah,
asking me to take over something that I resent? I don't think so.
yeah. I fought that dragon for the last 18 years and hated on that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hated on that dragon. Yeah, yeah. I appreciate that you're bringing some of these themes and to the surface, because your clients aren't the only ones that are experiencing them. There's going to be listeners out there. They're going to say, "Me too. Thank you for talking about it." So I know I'm not the only one in this silent world where I feel like I'm walking alone underneath humongous pressure. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. You've spoken also about how even when families, have got amazing, great wealth that they've built, that they can be emotionally disconnected. And I wondered if you'd also speak more about this. What is it that causes us, and I might be circling the wagons again, but I think this is kind of the crux of our conversation today. What is it that causes us to be so emotionally disconnected? I know you have said the past, but is it, that nobody has gone first? Like when you had spoken about the panel in Australia, is it that we need to see more positive role models? Like how do we go from A to Z? I mean, I'm not asking you to share your trade secrets, but
Well, they're not trade secrets, Angelina. I think it boils down to start the journey. And when I started my journey, I've been working with my coach for 21 years. Still work with a guy. His name is Dov Baron. There's a guy you may want to get on your podcast. Okay,
he's been on
DOV.
my podcast. He's been on my
Huh?
podcast. He's
Has
been on
he?
my podcast. Yeah.
So Dov. So that's my coach, right? And I remember when I was in the crap of it, he said, "You're not doing it for you. You're doing it for something bigger than you." And the bigger than me was my legacy of transforming the family business space. That's the driver that pushed me forward. So start your journey with something bigger than you that matters more than your story or your biases or your conditioning or your wound or your crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
That will propel you forward.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's interesting also how oftentimes people want approval from others, and especially if those other people are dead. And what I mean by that is, let's say their parents have passed on or their grandparents, and yet they're still performing on some mouse wheel, frozen in time, because they don't know how to unpack that or take that step of that journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's about, one of Daw's favorite quotes is, our past is leaking all over our present, impacting our future.
Yeah.
Sometimes we got to let go of the past.
Yeah. One of the things you also have mentioned is that you get to honor your past today, whether it's through new observations as well as celebrating the present. And I know a moment ago you spoke about Dov Baron's quote to you in the last 21 years of collaborating with him, that when
Not
our past.
collaborating, being coached by him.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
My coach, be
yes,
clear.
yes, okay. That when somebody's past is leaking all over their present and thus their future, how have you been able to then honor your past? Because some people, they will just shut down emotionally when they think about their past. They'll go into, a feeling of sadness compared to, let's say, an emotion of triumph.
Well, the first thing that I eventually got to was forgiving myself um, for how hard I have been on myself emotionally because of what happened to me as a child. I have forgiven my parents, and there's more work to do there. I believe there's always more work to do around forgiveness. And then from forgiveness, I was able to move to compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And from compassion, I was able to move to gratitude. I am who I am today because of what happened to me as a child. And what happened to me as a child was wrong and hurtful. And I'm incredibly grateful for it because I wouldn't be who I am today doing the work that I'm doing today had it not been for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for speaking into that. I think sometimes the greatest pain that we go through can be, and I don't know if you believe in astrology, they talk about this comet called Chiron, and they say where our wounding is also the invitation to then be able to invite other people to be free. So I'll be vulnerable right now. My Chiron is actually in two houses. It's in the 10th and the 11th house, which means that I will have a hard time fitting in socially and professionally in my lifetime. But having said that, I can also allow people to sit at a table if they're not invited. And I can be that person to say, come and sit with the tribe, come and sit, because I know what it is to be excluded. Yeah.
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 The
Um,
archetype of the wounded healer.
okay. I've not heard that before, but very cool. Yeah, I think it's interesting. And in some of the most painful moments, then become something that can allow that individual to be the trailblazer. I know your story is different than Anna Kalukas. I had Anna Kalukas on my platform, and she's now changing the world globally. But she went from, a place of complete darkness, and I don't know if you know her story or not.
No.
Okay, doesn't matter. But yeah, she went through. I think in some ways she was face to face with evil. Whether some people believe her story, they don't believe her story, and yet today what she's doing is allowing other people to come forward and know that they're going to be okay, and they don't have to feel a sense of shame. They can feel free and authentic and all those good things.
I believe the wound and purpose are the same coin.
Oh,
It's just which side do you focus on?
okay.
The
Okay.
wound becomes the purpose.
Oh, that's deep. That's deep. Yeah. It's interesting. I think sometimes, not always, somebody can be so trapped by the shame around the wound that they'll stay in that bubble and never leave to cross the bridge of what you had called compassion and then gratitude. And if we talk about generational curses, sometimes that individual can be the first person to say, I'm breaking that pattern. Let's choose a different path in that fork in the road. And I'm going to be the one that's going to carve out through the bricks and the ice and the snow.
Yeah, gonna go create a new emotional tradition.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share about how you're celebrating the present today? Because I think even that is countercultural, but it's in a good way, it's countercultural.
I I am as connected with the little boy inside of me as I can on a regular basis. His nickname is Little Chef.
Little chef?
Little Chef because he loves to cook.
Oh,
And Little Chef is my guide. I am, and how I connect with him is through feelings. I feel him, right? And I remember probably about 2 years ago after moving to Bermuda, I was really angry one day. I was having a great day, and anger came up, and I paused and I said to him, I said, it's okay to be angry. You have a right to be pissed for what happened to you as a child. And the moment I acknowledged that, the anger was gone.
yeah, yeah,
And then I started to realize that I was hiding him behind the anger and shame of what happened to me as a child. And it was time for him to step forth. And I had to choose to let go of the anger and shame. I think what happens is we are trapped in our wound and in our feelings of the wound where we think we are that. It's just something that happened to us, and it's just a feeling that we have as a result of it. We're much greater than that. Should we choose to look at it?
bravo, bravo. Yeah. It's
You know,
interesting. Go ahead, please.
Dawes said to me once, I think about, I don't know, 6 or maybe 8 years into the coaching thing. That was a very slow learner. I wanted to hang on to my stuff, right? As we all do. And he said to me, he says, when you connect with Little Chef, he says, that'll be the key to the treasure chest. And in my arrogance at the time, I thought, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to meet the girl. It's going to be awesome. And now I know what that means. The treasure chest is being connected to him.
Yeah.
I believe, this is my belief, they all want to reconnect with the child within. That's where the joy is. That's the juice. All of us have walked by a little child and they're just joy. We all want that. It's just behind the wound. It's right there. All you got to do is step into it, do the work.
Bravo. That's beautiful. Thank you for speaking into that, because I think a lot of times when you had said that the level of stubbornness when you were first collaborating with Dov Baron, it's, you don't know what I've been through, Dov. You don't know the pain, right? And almost somebody's identity can be built on that, because that chip on one shoulder. And I think even with anger, somebody, if we don't have the vocabulary for anger, it's like, well, anger can lead our life because that can make us feel alive. If we don't know how joy can make us feel alive.
Well, like Dov says, our greatest addiction is to our identity.
Oh,
And if I'm not shame, and if I'm not victim, and if I'm not anger, then who am I?
yeah, yeah.
That's our default. It's not who we are. We get to say who we are. We get to design our future. We get to design our legacy. And the only way to do that is to go and look at the stuff. Otherwise,
Yes.
the stuff becomes the legacy.
Oh, that's a tweetable moment right there. Thank you for saying that.
You're
Absolutely.
welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that even for somebody to come face to face with their legacy, not being a reactive thing well, this is how I arrived today, and compared to asking them, well, if you did step into it, how could you approach it differently, based on your values? And now that's causing them to think, it's causing their mind and heart and soul to search for new answers compared to just staying within their comfort zone. It's pushing them, especially if they've become comfortable because they've done well in life. Yeah. I
Yeah.
do. I think people want to grow, but sometimes that nudge can be a little scary, especially.
Well, it has to be bigger than them, So, with my client in Australia that I talked about, for him is he didn't want his family to become a statistic.
Mm,
He didn't, because one of my favorite things to ask, wealthy family business founders, men, is I'll say to them, I'm willing to bet that as a father, you never had the intention to work your tail off to one day build massive wealth, so that wealth will annihilate your family. Because that's what's going to happen if you don't do some kind of work
yeah.
on yourself and with the family.
Yeah. They say money, like success and failure, are magnifiers. And like you had
They
said,
are.
that
It
father,
magnifies who you are at your core, without a doubt.
correct. And then when you pass the weight of that magnifier to the next generation, if they don't know how to deal with their stuff, in addition to the parent stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Human capital is the foundation. So it's not money. Would you say more?
Sure. Um, when
Because I think we're
family,
also addicted to money, but keep going.
yeah, so when families and advisors think of family wealth, they typically think of financial capital. Okay, I believe it's got three components, which is financial capital, human capital, and social capital. The most valuable asset class, in my opinion, is human capital, because we get the human piece right. It will look after the financial piece and the social capital, which is the collective group plus their collective brand and reputation. Right? And there's a subcategory in that family human capital, which is the next generation. I think if we prepare them, emotionally prepare them to be good people, they will be responsible with the money and responsible with their relationships.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think somebody needs to take an interest in them beyond their assets and money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the demographic, that I work with and you work with in these ultra high net worth families is they have no one to talk to about their feelings. Right. And it's a lonely, lonely place.
Yeah.
A lot of them feel anxiety and fear and guilt and shame, and they've got no one to talk to because they feel that their feelings are wrong, and they're not. Those feelings are real, but they're not who they are. They're just feelings, and we don't have to. I strongly recommend and encourage them to talk about those feelings and walk past it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes is, the gateway to the forest, to the meadow of transformation, is by meandering through the forest of our feelings.
Oh, that's good also. That's a
And I
tweetable
use
moment.
and I use the word meandering because children meander. We don't spend enough time as human beings with our feelings and our emotions. We feel bad, we go shop, we drink, we have sex. We feel great, we go shop, we drink, we have sex.
Yeah.
Where's the feeling part of that? Where's the being with it? I'm staying at the Sheraton here in Toronto today, and I went to grab a cup of coffee yesterday, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude. And I thought to myself, I was in Sydney a couple days ago. I'm here for a couple days. I'm going to London with my son to get him settled in school there. And then I'm going to New York with my girlfriend. And I'm thinking, what a cool life. I get to visit 4 iconic cities in a month. And just the gratitude was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Good, good, good. You're living in the moment. Talk about, I think that's a brilliant example regarding how you're celebrating the present.
Yeah.
Gratitude, gratitude. Yeah.
Yes.
It wasn't the cup of coffee. It was the pausing, looking around you and like
It
meandering.
was both. It was really gratitude for the cup of coffee and for where I am. And there was a whole, I spent 15 minutes in it. It was great.
Oh, that's good. I should ask, what type of cup of coffee was it? Was it a mocha or is it a?
Almond milk cappuccino.
Oh, okay, okay. Cool, cool. Since this is a legacy podcast, what does the word legacy mean to you?
What I leave behind. And it's not the things. It's how I leave people behind that I've interacted with. Are they a better version of themselves? Are they a hero to themselves? Are they different in a positive way after I've met them?
Mm, that's lovely. That's lovely.
Thanks.
What would you say are the top 3 or 4 values that get to inspire you as you proactively, I would say, design your legacy today? Because I think your commitment to collaborating with Dov Baron, having a personal coach.
Well, I think the first one is curiosity. Being curious about me and about others and without judgment. So I would actually call it playful curiosity. And then vulnerability. Um, hmm.
I might also say determination and work ethic.
I would say resilience, actually.
Okay.
Resilience would be the
Okay.
third, just because, that's the little chef the whole way. I am where I am today because of him. He's never,
Yeah.
I've quit on him and abandoned him, but he's never done that to me. He's always been there.
Yeah. I also, I thank you for resilience. When we mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast regarding transforming the industry, that's why I thought about work ethic and determination because of your commitment to the craft. Like, not only am I going to do a great job with my clients, but also what is it that I can do to transform the industry? And so, if you could say resilience, wonderful. I think that is resilience, whether it comes from
Yeah.
the inside out or just
Yeah.
looking around and saying, I'm not going to just take the first no because other advisors are not looking at the value of emotional governance the same way that I see it because of what I know and what I've seen happen for my clients.
Yes.
Yeah. If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month for the next year to design a hardcover coffee table book, what would be in its pages? What pictures, images, lessons, stories?
Well, I would have, I'd have a picture of my grandmother and I in her kitchen teaching me how to cook when I was 5 or 6. I would have a picture of me teaching my kids how to cook when they were 5 or 6. Um, there's a picture of my father, my favorite picture of him. He's got, cigar in one hand and the stubby Heineken beers. Remember the stubby Heinies? Picture him. I would have a picture of my mother when she was younger, before she became who she became. Um, hmm. I'd have a picture of the ocean. I would have a picture of diving with the sharks, which I did this year. I have a big belief in facing a big fear every year, so that was the one for this year. Um, I would have a picture of my children laughing, and I would actually have a recording of that because I love when they laugh, especially my daughter. She's got such a unique laughter that's this warms my soul. And I'd have a picture of them bantering at each other in a playful way that they do. It's a great experience to watch those two banter with each other. Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you. What I hear the most is I think it's beautiful that it's almost like you've rebuilt your life after going through a war. I know you didn't serve in World War I or World War II, but everybody has their own war-torn stories. And then when they rebuild, they appreciate those cherished moments, the simple moments of the laughter and the bantering, because that's priceless. Yeah.
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 I always ask the guests to share their website at the end, but are there any closing thoughts or anything you would like to share about the subject of legacy before I read my closing paragraph?
Yeah, I would like to share with the audience, to be courageous and start your journey or continue your journey of personal development. Because either you're going to leave a legacy of the past or you're going to create a legacy that you get to design. I would hope it's the latter.
Yeah. And the best website would be veritage.ca.
Veritage.ca. Yeah, you can find us there. We're on LinkedIn. Yeah, so just that's where we are.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I know that you're going to be producing some new content for your podcast this year, as well as some rebranding for your company.
Yeah, we've just launched a rebrand. We're very proud of it. We love it. The podcast is new. It's now visual, so it's video, which is great. We've got some amazing guests. Yeah, we're working on another book. We just did our first influence event in Bermuda where we had 3 families there. That was a really cool experience. Yeah, we're doing I've got an amazing team, so we're doing some really great stuff.
Wonderful. Lovely. Yeah, I think that you're a pioneer in the industry, and I hope that anyone who listens that is serious about doing the work when it comes to family businesses and succession. I know my specialty is more so niched into legacy, but yours is that emotional, I might say revolution for them to go from, where they're at to really understanding that inner landscape and that emotional connectivity. So I hope the listeners
Thank
reach
you.
out. Yes.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate that, Angelina.
Yeah. Before I read the closing paragraph, I just want to take a moment to thank you for being a guest. I think that you brought some really great insights to today's conversation, whether it's where we started about the spoken and unspoken rules, fighting for one's biases, what it represents when people initially come to the table and do this type of work to get unstuck. And also, understanding the value around family dynamics, that somebody's emotional governance just can't be 2 pieces of paper that lists shared values and a shared mission vision. There's so much, underneath the water that one and, the whole family needs to explore. Some other things is, understanding the best and the worst traditions. And like you had said, fair and equal might not always be the same thing. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's a real honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners and viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're checking us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud, please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. Send an email to either Franco or myself. Let us know your thoughts about today's conversation. So thank you so much for joining us again this week. And thank you, Franco, for speaking into your legacy.